Well, the federal election is in high gear, and so is the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our 2015 federal candidate interviews with those individuals seeking to be a member of Parliament for either Cambridge or the new federal riding of Kitchener South Hespeler. And today in our Chamber studio, all the way from Cambridge, is the Green Party candidate for Cambridge, Michelle Braniff. How are you?
I'm glad to be here. I'm great. Thank
Are
you.
you having fun knocking on doors?
Well, I have only been knocking on a few doors, but I've been meeting people in different places
Well, that's
and
the
enjoying
same
it.
thing. It doesn't matter whether you knock
Yeah.
on doors or whether you're just in gatherings and meeting people. I think it's critically important. Most politicians would tell you that, and I know this is your first go-round, but as an elected or as a candidate, most people will say that's the best part of being a politician is when you get to campaign, because it's the only time that people will talk to you.
That's true. They have been talking to me with great questions.
That's very good, and it's great to have you here, because the Green Party, has always played a role, of course, even in Cambridge elections for a long, long time. But I think there's no question about it from all indications. The Green Party's momentum is building strongly. I think, personally, from my own perspective, Elizabeth May won the debate.
That was my thought.
I know that all of the pundits had a hard time. Although what they did say was that Elizabeth May did incredibly well, and of course, and then they put that into context by saying, well, of course, she was the only one that had nothing to lose. Well, she did have something to lose. She could have lost support, and I think what she really did was probably gain some support. So kudos to her the next time you see her.
All right. Yeah.
She did a fantastic
She's coming
job.
this way soon. So,
Is she?
yeah.
Oh, very good. Maybe we get her in here and do an interview with her or something like that. Anyway, Michelle, in 2008, 2009, we all know we had the worst economic time since the Great Depression. Your party suggests that the Conservatives have skewed our economy towards fossil fuel export. Do you believe this is intentionally done, or that the reality is it is our biggest export industry? Remember, we've had a currency that a lot of economists will say is tied to the oil and gas industry. What's your feeling on it?
Well, I think the point about the skewering is we need to measure things properly, and the federal government needs to show leadership in that respect. So there's subsidies that don't serve any purpose. The oil and gas companies are large, they're multinational, so what the Green Party is in favor of, first of all, the Green Party is acknowledging that there are environmental issues. Green Party says it's possible to have a strong economy and a good environment. In fact, there's research that shows that green economies actually do really, really well. So one of the things that the Green Party is talking about is to set the prices right. That we don't have resources that are available for free and can be used, and the cost is as if it was free. We need to set things so that polluters who are actually causing damage are paying a cost to reflect that, and green companies that are doing things to clean things up have the incentives, and so what we want to do is have leadership that sets the prices right so that the market can work properly, not have things that are skewed and inaccurate.
Yeah, I think too, some experts will say, yeah, it's too bad we have a petrocurrency when really the price of oil is dictated by an entity that we don't control, and that's the problem. So our currency is tied to something that somebody else is deciding what the value of it is. But I think, personally, I guess our economy is much more than oil and gas, and I think we've moved slightly away from a petrocurrency, but there's no question about it. Fossil fuel is an important export for Canada. Absolutely.
That's true. In the 1970s, manufacturing was far larger.
Yep.
Manufacturers tend to invest in research and development. Manufacturers don't export the jobs, right? The jobs are here. So there has been some shifts, and the idea is you talked about where the currency being oil and gas. Well, maybe one of the things is we need a more sophisticated way of measuring what's going on, right? Is the more we're measuring, so that we have accurate costs, accurate prices. We're getting rid of anomalies where
Yeah.
we're creating incentives to pollute
Yeah.
or incentives to do things we want, and instead measure the positive aspects, looking at things like Canadian. The measure of the well-being, and I forgot what it's called.
Oh, yeah.
The GPI. That we're expanding.
The happy index.
Yeah. So, but we're measuring things that really matter, and not that we're abandoning other measurements, but let's have a sophisticated way of measuring, a sophisticated understanding of what's going on, and some incentives to create investments. From the Green Party has been saying that the green economy is a huge opportunity. There's all kinds of opportunities there for innovation, for investments. Canada should be joining that rather than lingering on. There's a lot of indications that the day of oil and gas and carbon fuels is numbered, right?
Well,
so we need to be ready for the next the century that's opening, not clinging with perverse incentives to the one that's over.
You look at automobiles are coming a long way. Tesla's doing some wonderful stuff with battery technology. That, eventually, like that would be everybody's first choice.
Right.
It's quiet.
So
it's clean.
The idea is to look at what leadership can be provided to have more and more incentives for those kinds of initiatives, right? To reward the things that are good for Canada and good for our green economy, good for our environment.
That will definitely scare the oil and gas industry, but they're also looking in other directions as well. So.
Well, and maybe they're going to improve some efficiencies and look at some other things. I mean, the reality is we have to we have to be ready for the times, and our measuring tools and our incentives have to match the direction where we want to go.
For sure. It's no surprise to business that the economy has slipped of late. We really, politicians have been walking the ivory halls of Parliament. Business has largely been chugging along, not bustling along. So, but trade is essential for Canada. 80% of what we make is exported. We all know that. All your policy says about trade is we must be more creative in reducing our unbalanced dependence on trade with the U.S. To me, that means strengthening or opening up more free trade agreements to other countries. Is that true?
Well, actually, I think the way you read it is you were looking for headings or whatever. There's more in Vision Green than that the part about the trade with the U.S. It's looking at small business as I mean, the Green Party is the party for small business. As you know, small business is the biggest employer, and small business spends money locally, right? A lot of it is about tourism, right? In this area, so there's things that have happened recently that have shut down, kind of Canada's borders around people coming in for visits and tourism and that type of thing to open up some federal leadership of people coming to visit Canada. Encouraging the productivity that is about research and development and about innovation, so that there's leadership of Canada becoming, taking on more of a role in those areas, and also opening up so that we have balance. We want to have security, but we want to have our borders moving. So it's the Green Party's approach is broad, informed decision making with the data, following the recommendations, and showing leadership around good businesses in order to support.
Perfect. Another issue that faces small businesses sometimes a really, really big problem. I've had a few of those big problems this year. Is a skilled trade issue. Governments, and it's the easy way. They invest in educational programs and try and encourage kids to go and take up the trades, which is honorable and it's great and it works to some degree. We do get skilled tradespeople coming out, but when a business needs a skilled tradesperson, they need them now, not in 2 or 3 years when that person comes out of school. We need welders, we need steel fabricators, and we need truck drivers. A lot of people will say, that's not a skilled trade, and I say, well, back up a 45-foot trailer to a loading dock.
Absolutely.
You'll find out very, very quickly that that's a skilled trade. What would a green government do to help small businesses get the skilled workers? Because the temporary foreign worker program just isn't working.
No.
We need immigrant skilled workers like we did when we built this country. We've known this for 20 years that we're going to have this problem. What would the Green Party do to address those issues?
So the Green Party doesn't need to be a Green government. The Green Party collaborates across all levels of government, all parties. We've done a lot with one MP, Elizabeth May. You know, if I'm the member of Parliament, I will work and to make these changes happen. So one of the reasons that the program doesn't work with the foreign workers is the measurement is skewed. It's actually not catching where we need workers and where we don't need workers, right? So that's a huge problem, and it also is in some respects exploiting those workers, right? Bringing them in on a temporary basis.
Yeah, then kicking them
and then kicking them out and all of that repercussions. So the idea is not to close our borders. It's to have an accurate way of figuring out where we need skilled workers and
where they are,
and how we can bring them here. I mean, there's also challenges as we're bringing in skilled workers and then they're not working in their skilled area. They end up working.
Well, we've got a lot of people like that.
Right. So what a lot of this about is the management of the data and the information.
Yeah.
There's places where government has not shown the leadership about.
I would agree with
measuring.
you absolutely 100%. There's no question about it. I talk to immigrant workers a lot who have immigrated to Canada, but they can't find a job in their skill.
No.
Doesn't exist.
So I think there needs to be some consistency in what we're doing to recruit people from other countries to Canada. Make sure that the message that we're giving is one we can deliver on, and make sure that we're recruiting in the places where the best opportunities are available.
There's a lot of MBAs and PhDs and medical doctors driving cabs in Toronto. Not that driving cab in Toronto is a bad occupation, but they didn't come here to drive cab.
And we have a shortage of doctors.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
So there's the Green Party is in
Don't
favor.
frustrate me anymore, Michelle.
Well, I could tell you stories, but we'll let that one go then.
Doing business in Ontario is extremely expensive. Hydro rates are probably the number one thing on every business person's mind. They say, hydro rates are going to be going up dramatically in the next few years. They're going to drive me out of business. The Ontario government has already announced that they're going to have a cap and trade system, a carbon tax system of some sort. That's going to pile on more costs. But more importantly, right now, the big one is the Ontario Retirement Pension Plan and the federal government's participation or non-participation. It's largely, small business would tell you that they're driving it down their throat. And they are. It's happening. It's going to happen no matter what. Small businesses are not happy about it. Medium-sized businesses are not happy about it. Large-sized businesses are not happy about it either. So we're piling on all of these costs. Even at the federal level, you're talking about a $15 minimum wage. I know it's only for federal employees. Minimum 3 weeks. But we all know that once those get brought in, it's a mechanism or a way in order to get the rest of society to adopt the same policies and principles. Small business looks at this and says, my gosh, it'd be okay if it was part of our tax. Pile on all of these costs, on our profits rather. Put it on our profits, because we're not making any profits anyway. So you wouldn't be getting anything out of it. But now you're taking it out of the fundamental operation, which is taking their small or meager or no profits and driving them down to say, well, I've got to lay off employees. So these programs they're not job creators, that's for certain.
So I'm going to just pull out a few things because you raised a whole lot of. One of them really is about when you're talking about government waste, we're talking about accountability, right? So the Green Party is in favor of a whole lot of things to put in place accountability. When you're talking about what's going on with provincial government, really the federal government needs to provide leadership and there needs to be a collaboration. The Green Party is in favor of collaboration across all levels of government. The federal government can't save money by downsizing things to municipalities and provinces. The same people, every single person lives in either a township or municipality in a province or a territory in Canada, right? That's kind of the nature of it. Yeah. So we need to collaborate and we need to work together so that some of what was happening with respect to pensions is there was a failure of the collaboration that the provinces did invite, right?
Exactly.
So the idea is as far as the Green Party is concerned, is there are a lot of efficiencies with the Canada Pension Plan in terms of expanding its scope. Not to say necessarily the details, because we need to consult the experts, get some input, find out what's going on. The other thing I think is really, really important. And I think I already said that the Green Party is the party of small business.
Yes, you did. Yeah.
I will say it again because it's really important. It's what the Green Party is all about. But one of the initiatives that the Green Party would really push for, and there probably will be a minority government, is to say we need to have some legislation that says every time we change the federal laws, we ask this question: what is the impact on small business? Because small business is the engine of the Canadian economy.
Absolutely.
So you figure out what's the impact on small business, and maybe you make an exception for small business, maybe you put in a transition plan, maybe you do something else, but you do not put in legislation without considering this very, very important part of the Canadian economy. So those are just some highlights. It doesn't solve all the problems you raised.
No, it doesn't. Well, I'd love to have a government come in and solve all of the problems, but that may never happen. The cost of government is absolutely out of control. We all know that. The Fraser Institute came out and said 42% of a $79,000 income goes to taxes. In the last 50 years, the household income has gone up by 500%. And over that same period of time, taxes have raised 1,800%. Doesn't take a mathematician to put it on a graph and figure out that those two lines could potentially meet sometime down the future. That's government's need for our money, and our ability to provide it to them will meet. And that's just totally wrong. It's not what government was intended to do. We work very hard for our money, everybody does. They shouldn't see the majority of it, or even that much of it, going to government. Maybe that's why we can't save money for our retirement, is because too much of it's going away to government. But what will the Green government do to control costs? And I know you've talked about some of that, about measurement. Do you think that that's going to be the real key to controlling costs and maybe reducing the waste, or mitigating or eliminating the waste in government?
So there's a few things. One is, when you're talking about taxes, is the Green Party is very much in favor of fair taxes. Okay, so that the system that is set up is not fair, right? So we're talking about tax reform to be more fair. Even little things like offshore tax havens. That's found money, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of things around the tax system that if you fix the tax system, the impact on individual households is better. But there is also the question of the efficiency and accountability. All right, so that the government, I talked about the measuring. What government needs to do is do what businesses do, have a service plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so that part of the accountability and the Green Party, we don't need to have a Green government. We need to have a Green member of Parliament in Cambridge. I will go to Ottawa. I will work with the other Green Party members, and we will have influence.
And root out the waste.
Well, the thing is, these are very simple, practical ideas. They're based on data. They're based on research. A party who's willing to collaborate even a little, and we have seen NDP and Liberal pick up some of the ideas that came from the Green Party. We're delighted. We're delighted. That's our role. But one of the places is to to say, have a service plan. Say, what is the outcome? What are the outcomes we're looking for? How much we're paying, and has this department accomplished?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole lot of places
like
for
you said,
increased
just like
accountability.
what business does. Business looks at it and says, "Hey, we're putting good money after bad here. We need to change or correct it or move it or do something else to mitigate those losses."
And the difficulty is we can get the, and we probably have a question about deficit, so I won't talk too long about it. But when we're talking about deficit, the reality is businesses don't work just with income statements. They do a balance sheet. They amortize their assets. They look at depreciation. The infrastructure we can't treat it, infrastructure that was built 40 years ago, as if it's
No.
brand new. You know, we can't have a balanced budget at a federal level
We
at
do
the
that
expense of
regularly.
the provinces.
You know, we do that regularly. We have an infrastructure deficit in this country.
Absolutely. So the Green Party says, you know, we want true accounting.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of the Green Party, true accounting, to be revenue neutral. So you know, the Green Party isn't in favor of you know, spending more money. It's in favor of, in fact, also retiring debt, because that makes
Yeah.
Canada beholden to the International
Yeah.
Monetary Fund. But the idea of true accounting is we put values.
Yeah.
And look at, you know, a social deficit in terms of things like healthcare,
Yeah.
and infrastructure deficit, and not just the financial
Yeah.
deficit. And I think that kind of thinking and those ways of measuring would get governments not to just be talking,
Yeah.
you know, every 4 years or every election, but actually collaborating to have useful solutions
Mm-hmm.
to the problems of waste.
Because I always tell my wife, I say, when we buy a new fridge, I say, I need an ice maker in the fridge. Why? Well, because I'm wasting gas going to the corner store to buy a bag of ice all the time. So that's really what you're talking about. Spend the extra money on the ice maker, because in the long term, it's the efficient way to go. And it probably saves me a lot of aggravation when I go to the fridge.
Well, even more to the point is sometimes people, you know, it's really fun to get new broadloom or new furniture, but if you need a new roof, you need to fix the roof.
Yes.
Right? And you know, it's very predictable when you're going to need a new roof, or you're going to need
That's
new
very good,
right,
yes.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
So
No,
you
that's
build that
good.
right into the system, and then instead of having sound bites
Yeah.
that, you know, are inflammatory or derogatory,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, because one of the things the Green Party wants to do is improve the dialogue
Yeah.
in Parliament. Well, let's talk about the science, the data, the background.
Yeah.
Let's talk about measurements, and then let's talk about
Yeah,
good
make
ideas.
it harder to argue with.
That's right. That's right. Is it becomes very obvious
this is
when
it.
before the
Yeah.
water starts coming through the roof.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I like the fact that this roof isn't leaking. You know, it's wonderful. But before it comes through, that there's a plan to say this roof is going to need to be replaced in 10 years. We have to be ready for
agree.
that.
Scandals have been the highlight of every single government. No one can claim to be the perfect party scandal-free. I suppose the Green Party can. Yet politicians think we forget. And when we remind them of those past scandals, they say, yes, but things are different now. And things really never get different. You know, Duffy and Wallen and Brazeau are in the headlines now, largely because, let's be honest about this. There's an election, they're conservatives, and there's a conservative government in power. It's not they're the only three senators that have ever been scandalous, or MPs, or whatever. You know, this happens a lot in government. In fact, the NDP have no senators, and yet their MPs' expenses are being called into question, I think to the tune of about $2.7 million. So no one is expelled from this necessarily. It can happen to everyone. But really, we're talking about the Senate. The Senate's got problems because largely the Senate sets its own rules. And that's like, you know, the inmate running the prison, so to speak. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. The NDP want to abolish it. The Conservatives would probably favor abolishing it, but said, no, that can't be done constitutionally because you need 100% support and you'd never get that. So they favor an elected Senate. The Liberals, however, say, no. We like the Senate. We just want to reform it, make it work a little bit better, and figure out a better system, and maybe have an independent body appoint them, or whatever the case may be, or recommend appointments. Because unless you change the Constitution, it's always and forever the Prime Minister's call to appoint a senator. So, what would the Green Party do?
Well, the Green Party acknowledges that constitutional reform is pretty difficult. And, you know, maybe it needs to happen. But in the meantime, there's lots of changes that can happen to make things improved. It makes a lot of sense. Even very, very small businesses and very small nonprofit organizations have expense sheets that they have a different person who reviews the expense sheet. And different people sign off. It protects the person who's looking for the expense.
Exactly.
And it's educational.
Yep.
Is I took a client out for lunch, and where I work I can only spend $15. I spent 20, 5 of it was my own. The first time I did it, I didn't do it again.
Yeah, exactly.
and so that people learn, right?
Yep.
So that you have these systems in place that are checks and balances. That businesses don't have someone writing blank checks.
No.
Right? And so you need to have that in place. Mandatory ethics training. Now, the thing about mandatory ethics training is not so much that people might not understand ethics, it's that it gets people talking about it, considering it, thinking about it, bringing it into place. So when you look at all of the emails were exchanged, an obvious thing to me would be to check on with Revenue. I still call them Revenue Canada, but check there. Check with some of the kind of audit type of function, right? So that you need to change the culture.
Yes.
And mandatory ethical education is beginning of changing the culture because it introduces people that it's important. It has them making the dialogue.
You favor that. I favor a good spanking. It's
well, if
they should know better than to take our money. There's only one. I said this for years, even when I was an elected official in town. An elected official really only has one job. And that one job is to be a good steward of the public person. That's it. There are no other real important aspects to their job function. They don't need to kiss babies. They don't need to go on fancy trips. They need to be good stewards of the public person. Very few of them hold that as their core principle as a public official.
I agree. We really wouldn't spank them, but a slap on the wrist would be very effective.
Well, you can't spank your children anymore, so we couldn't spank.
Well, we do natural and logical consequences.
Yes.
Right. With children is if they we try to protect them as much as they can, and then if they make a mistake, there's consequences. Well, the reality is we haven't got that system set up with respect to public service that there are enough levels of scrutiny. We've got bodies that are supposed to be overseeing that are too closely related to the sector that they're supposed to oversee. They should be arm's length. Appointments should not be made by patronage. We really need appointments to be made on the advice of an independent committee that comes up with the qualifications.
Especially if it's an appointment. Different if it's elected, because elected is a democratic process, but appointments need to be based on skill. No question about it.
One of the things that Elizabeth May said is, the Senate would be an opportunity to have representatives perhaps from the provinces, the municipalities, the townships, that to actually have all those levels of government working together. But
cool.
It needs to be, so electoral reform, democratic reform includes changing the culture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
The culture needs to change. It needs to be, more collaborative, more transparent.
Yep.
And accountability, it needs to be in the culture, but then you also have to have, whether you call it a slap on the wrist or natural and logical consequences, you need to have these places where people who are inclined, you try not to appoint people who are inclined to push boundaries and see what they can get away with, but you set it up that they know where the boundaries are and they don't get away with it the first time, right? Like why wait till something accumulates to a huge amount of money when you might be able to stop them at, and to say you can't have it. Right? They put in the expense and they can't have it, then they're not going to try again.
It's just unbelievable. But speaking of that, you talked a little bit about it. You mentioned it, electoral reform. I want to ask you about that because what Green Party's philosophy has always been is proportional representation, as opposed to the first past the post. I'm flippy-floppy on that, only because there's a couple of concerns that I have. And I know the NDP are in favor of it. I know you folks are in favor of it. I know that Justin Trudeau has said that the Liberal Party would like to establish a committee, an all-party committee, and look at electoral reform. So I think from my perspective,
He read the Green Vision. That's
yeah,
what
he
we
probably
say.
did.
and more, more power
yeah,
to him.
yeah,
We're happy
yeah.
that he's able to be
Probably. Don't
influenced by
forget,
Elizabeth May.
leaders don't have all the answers. They're
Well,
supposed to look to the little people to get their answers.
And that's what collaboration is all
Absolutely.
about. Yeah.
So, here's my problem. I hate our system right now simply because when somebody gets elected to a majority government, they stand up and they say, I've now got a mandate from the people. And they got 37% of the vote. Well, they didn't get a mandate from anybody. They probably, of eligible voters, they probably got 21%. And that's no mandate for certain. Proportional representation, however, let me qualify that. I love majority governments because that's the only government that gets something done. Whether I like it or not doesn't matter. Something gets done. With proportional representation, we will never have a majority government. Never. In spite of the fact people say, well, don't say that. Well, okay, it's possible to have one, but we will never have one. However, other jurisdictions have had really good success with proportional representation, no doubt about it. But I really think fundamental change to our entire system has to happen before we can go that route. You know, we can't have a government fall every 3 months and have an election. So we have to change the British parliamentary system that we're in to say, no, you're not going to get, you know, a government's not going to fall as a result of a negative vote. It just got negative vote. End of story. So how does the Green Party look at proportional representation?
Well, as we were joking around about, definitely it needs to be, studied and get the best system possible and address all of the questions. If you look at Canadian history, we actually, with the system we have, we're switching governments more frequently than in Europe where they have proportional representation.
Yeah.
So the part about it flipping around, we've also got a history of Canada, probably before the party partisan got so strong, is the earlier history of lots of things happening with minority governments. And the Green Party philosophy, of course, is in terms of government action, you base it on data, you base it on science, you collaborate, you make good decisions, not ideological decisions, right? So that's, some of the things around the good government. Absolutely, there needs to be a very all levels of change in terms of the culture. Proportional representation, you don't actually, there's places where it's called a majority and it actually isn't a majority. So the problem is, with first past the post. Proportional representation, you put people in parliament in a way that matches how voting happens. The first past the post, it ends up in Canada, it's made us more regional. And if you look at some of the
you look at the maps and you can see that.
Yes, and the reality is that you're also electing people who are speaking more from that regional perspective rather than the moderates from each of the areas, right? Like let's get the moderates in there that we're more likely to have collaboration. First past the post is from the 12th century. There aren't very many democracies that still have that. So proportional representation is the way to go. It needs to be designed, it needs to put in place, and the parliamentary committees, we did that, a lot more of that than we have done in the last 10 years. That is nonpartisan. The parties work together, they come up with solutions, they bring it forward in the House, and it makes sense, right? So, the Green Party is very much in favor of proportional representation as something that needs to happen to reflect what voters want. The fact that people talk about splitting votes and voting strategically is an indication that we have a flawed system.
Yeah. Well,
if we had a good system, people would vote for who they think would be the best.
Proportional representation would make sure that every vote counts, and that's probably key and fundamental, there's no question, because a lot of people who are apathetic and don't vote say, well, it doesn't matter anyway. But, if proportional representation was there, every single one would matter, for sure.
If we began to do politics differently, right, this based on the research, based on the input, with transparency, accountability, good stewardship,
maybe the odd spanking.
Limits in place. We don't want to be violent or anything like that. But then you're going to engage the public because they're gonna feel part of the system, not as if they're a pawn.
No,
right?
Exactly. Finally, our campaign, as you know, is Small Business Too Big to Ignore. We absolutely love this. We're going forward forever because small business will always be too big to ignore. 98.2% of all employer businesses in Canada have under 100 employees. 2/3 of Canadians work for those businesses, and they're locally owned. We all know someone who owns a small business. We buy from them every day. We shop in their stores. We try and support them as much as we can. Singly, they're the most important element of our economy. 80% of every new job in Canada comes from a small business under 100 employees. What will the Green government do to either through grant programs, through taxes, red tape, or other burdens help business, and in particular small businesses, grow?
Did I mention that the Green Party is the party?
Yeah, I think you
for
did
small
a few
business?
times, yes.
So I also mentioned the legislation. So every time
Yep.
there's a change, we look at the impact on small business. There's a way of streamlining the red tape. Why are small businesses filling the same form in with the same information and it's not shared? So that's another initiative that the Green members of Parliament would support. So we don't need to be a Green government. We can be convincing because we have brilliant ideas
Yes.
that are available and we collaborate. The investment. In fact, since the recession, it's been harder to get venture capital. So the Green Party is in favor of providing some leadership around green business startups with small business, and also business clusters and incubators, like in Sweden. We got a little bit of it in some sectors here, but to really expand that, to create the vibrancy for the small businesses, so that they're there, so that we're providing leadership to encourage the research and development, innovation, the green economy. A lot of those ventures are small businesses. So it's really a case of providing the leadership and acknowledging the importance of small business. When we talk about the tax reform, is the small business tax needs to be, the Green Party is looking at corporate income tax, which in fact has gone down. Between 2008, it was 18%. 2012, I believe it's significantly less than that. Now we're below any of the other G7 countries. Go back to 2008. It makes us competitive for corporate tax generally, but not small business. At least small business, the income tax it needs to be lower, right? So the fair tax will be better for small business. The reality is having a new way of measuring things, so that we actually are investing in infrastructure across the country. Also impacts costs for small business, because if the sewage backs up on your street, the small business is either paying for it themselves or their insurance rates are going to go up, right? So that there's places where this true accounting is going to be better for small business, because the government is going to do the service that they're supposed to do, is have a balanced budget, not just financially, but with respect to infrastructure, with respect to social programs, so that the small business gets to do their business, but part of it would be to encourage the investment.
Excellent. Michelle Braniff, the Green Party candidate for Cambridge. This is your opportunity to talk directly to the constituents of Cambridge and tell them why they should vote for you.
If you vote for me, I will be mostly accountable to Cambridge. The Green Party doesn't whip votes. They don't demand votes. The Green Party says that what Cambridge wants is more important. If I am elected, I will go to Parliament and I will start working on all these ideas that I've told you about through collaboration, discussion with other Green MPs and with other members of Parliament in the House. So a vote for me is a vote to put Cambridge on the map. Cambridge and North Dumfries and part of Brant, because I have that new electoral district. But to take that district that's called Cambridge in federal politics and make sure that the interests of the people who vote and live here are followed, not party partisan.
Excellent, Michelle. Thanks very much for coming in. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
And
I enjoyed it.
Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you. Thank you very much.